This video is brought to you by Mammoth Headwear. One size fits big.
Hey everybody, it's Jimmy from the DIY and Digital, and it's time for part 4 of our MRROne Project Railroad. Welcome back everybody. Today's episode is an absolute doozy because we are doing a lot of detailing and really finishing up the work on MRROne. We've got trees, we've got street lights, we've got roads, we've got figures, we've got all sorts of other little detailing things. So let's just jump right in. We start this episode by installing the bases of the buildings, and we're going to use white glue to do this in case we either make a mistake or we need to do something else and make a change. That way they're easy to remove. We then use double-sided tape to place the buildings while we work on the layout. You can also use this method for permanent installation if you don't intend to move your layout around. I have a detailed tutorials on how I paint and detail several of these buildings, and I will link them below. Now, one thing I did forget to do earlier when I was doing scenery was to put on a rock face, and it was my original intention to simply buy some pre-made faces, but I want to try a new method. I use a tool to chip away randomly at the foam base until I get an organic rocky shape that I like. I then use a sanding sponge to smooth it out. Now I tape the track to protect it and spray Rustoleum Primer as the base color. So I let that dry, and while it was drying, I go ahead and begin covering the hillside with a tree canopy. I am making puffball trees for this, which I consider the most cost-effective way to cover a hillside with a tree canopy. I have gone into detail with puffball trees in another tutorial, and I will link that below. This is a time-consuming and messy process, so I highly recommend wearing gloves while you do this. Now that the trees are in place and the rocks have dried, we can detail them. I will be using the dry brush method. This is where you take a brush, dab it in some paint, and then remove most of the paint back off of it by brushing it against a surface. Then you paint over the surface that you're detailing with a mostly dry brush, hence the name. This puts very little paint on it and accentuates the highlights and details of the surface. Now before we continue, I am going to do a little cleanup. Now it's time to install some detail lighting, in this case, street lights. You may need to lift up your building bases and drill larger holes for the wires, and this is why we use white glue in the first place to secure down our buildings in case we needed to adjust something. Next, we thread the wires through the bases. If you need to lift the bases out, that's totally okay. I was able to guide the wires through the base with little trouble, but if you're having issues, sticking a tiny stir straw through the hole and then cutting it to size and threading the wire through it is a great way to easily run wire through the base. As you can see, I did have to remove most of the bases for this, which is why I'm glad I used white glue versus something stronger to secure them in the first place. Now we flip our table up and we can wire the lights. We will be hooking up all of our lights to our 5-volt bus we installed in an earlier video. We still need resistors though, so make sure that you install a 1K resistor somewhere along the wiring of each light. We will be using the heat shrink tubing method to connect all the wires that I did in a previous tutorial for this layout.
Once we wired everything up, we go ahead and plug in our 5-volt power supply and do a quick test. This video is brought to you by Mammoth Headwear. One size fits big.
So as you guys know, Mammoth Headwear has been sponsoring the last few episodes on this channel. Taylor over at Mammoth Headwear reached out for me to give me a hat to try, which is something really cool because I typically don't wear hats, and it's not because I don't like them, it's because I have a big head, 7 3/4 to 8, somewhere around there. So when Taylor told me he had a hat that is for big-headed guys that he didn't even know was like me, he just asked me to try it, and I tried the hat that he sent me, and it has been absolutely amazing in terms of hats. It's a classic snapback ball cap, and it has been the most comfortable hat that I have ever worn as a big-headed person. I've been wearing this around running errands and all sorts of stuff just to see how comfortable it is in the long term, wearing it throughout the day, and I have zero complaints whatsoever. It is a absolutely comfortable hat, and it's pretty stylish too. So thank you, Taylor over at Mammoth Headwear, for sending me this hat over to try. You've actually given me a hat that for the first time fits comfortably, so I'm very grateful to you. If you want to try these hats, you can go to mammothheadwear.com. You can check out this promo code, and you can use that when you purchase them. So Mammoth Headwear, one size fits big.
It looks like all of our lights are working, so we can begin to seal up all of the lights and all of the other wires, and then connect the switch that will control them. I use hot glue applied to the wire holes to seal them in. This will lessen the chance of the wires being pulled and snapped off. We are going to wire up the 5-volt bus switch a little differently than we did the 12-volt bus. We want the switch to control the entire bus, so we will be inserting the switch into the main power line to the 5-volt bus. To do this, we will be using one of these DC terminal adapter jacks. We start by hooking both of our red feeders from the switch into the positive side of the terminal jack. We then connect a white wire to the black switch feeder and a green wire to the negative terminal jack from the DC plug. We use the heat shrink tube method to secure it all in place. I am using different colors so that it's easy to disseminate which one is the main power and which one is the power that goes to each individual light. The white then attaches to the red screw terminal on the bus, and the green attaches to the black screw terminal. We then plug the power into the terminal jack, and we're done with the lights. Now it's time to prep the buildings for their roofs. We place some tissue paper around the lights in the buildings. This will help diffuse the light and make it look like it's coming from more than one window. Now we glue our roofs on. This is done using simple super glue. Now with all of the buildings in place, I can finally put the rest of the scenic base in that I started in part 3 of this series. Now it's time for one of my favorite parts, which is installing trees. Trees can bring a railroad to life. I will be using several different types of trees, including ones that I bought and ones that I've made myself using seafoam. I have made several tutorials on trees, and I will link those below. I use a small awl to punch holes in the foam for the trees. I then apply a dot of white glue before securing the tree in the hole. I like to either place trees in groups of 3 to 5 or place them by themselves. I also stick some trees into my hillside to help blend the hillside itself in a little bit. Next, I go to detail the streets. I'm using a method that I've gone over in a previous tutorial, and that is cutting electrical tape into narrow strips and placing it by hand. I'll link this below. This allows for easy placement and replacement until I get the lines just right. When I go over a grade crossing, I lay the tape over it and then cut it afterwards. For any white lines, I use an identical method. While I like to do most things DIY, I absolutely love the signs from Tichy Train Group. They are very detailed and reasonably priced. I have them linked below. I install them by drilling a small hole with my pen vise and then applying a drop of white glue and then sticking the sign in place. Now I go to make the road lines permanent. I do this by painting a thin coat of Mod Podge matte medium over the lines. Once it dries, the tape will be sealed in. Next, we go to apply some additional vegetation. I place white glue in various locations and sprinkle Woodland SCENIC's coarse turf over it to get a brushy undergrowth effect. I then seal it up using either IPA or wet water and my 50-50 white glue water mixture. I then place a few beads of the 50-50 mixture and some clump foliage down to simulate larger bushes. Next, it's time to do a little bit of weathering. I use pastels that I've ground up on a piece of sandpaper. I have shown how to do this in a previous tutorial and I'll link that below. I also weathered the sidewalks. The colors I used for painting didn't end up matching, but that's okay. A lot of times concrete doesn't look uniform, so weathering it to appear that it has been there a while even though it's different colors will actually make it look a little bit more realistic. Another detail I include are cars. I install a few of these cars that I bought online. They're not the most detailed things in the world, but they're affordable, and I apply them using white glue. The last detail I add is a few figures. These I found online and I will link below. I put a dab of white glue and then place the figure's feet in the glue. I use these tiny clothespins to hold the figures up while they dry. Notice I put the clothespins in the middle of the figure so that it does not go into the glue and the clip gets glued onto the base. So that is all of the detailing work that is to be done on the MRROne Project Railroad. I'm really excited. One other thing that I did end up doing, just because I intend on moving this railroad around a lot, is I did run super glue to attach
all the buildings in place just to make sure that they don't move. And I did that for anything else that I didn't use any of the white glue on, like cars and such. You don't have to do that unless you intend on moving the railroad around a lot like I do. So super glue around the bases of the buildings is something that I did. So, but that's it for today. Next week I'm doing the big reveal, and we're actually going to do a little mini op session on MRROne, showing you guys how I run it. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to Taylor over at Mammoth Headwear for sponsoring this video. And I also want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. They are listed right here. And if you would like to become a patron, you can at the link in the description below. You can do it for as little as $1 a month. So until next time, I'm Jimmy from the DIY and Digital. Stay safe, be kind, and happy railroading. So that is all of the detailing work on the DD. That's not the right railroad. So as you guys know, Mammoth Headwear has been sponsoring the last few episodes. So I shoot this in the garage, and my wife's having to leave right now. So this is what it looks like with the garage door up. And there it goes back down, and down, and down, and down, and down, and down, and down. And now we're back to normal.